I've been thinking about what it really means to stand alone when you are outnumbered. Now, how do you give voice to that? I mean, long enough have we taken our cues from people who would challenge us saying, why be different? Or let's just do enough to get us by. Long enough have we settled for second best, to convince ourselves that it's okay to sacrifice our integrity, our quality of life, and that's the stuff that's easily sacrificed. And so the world is so full of folks who would just easily give up. Their favorite words, well, it's why try, better quit while you're ahead, give it up. Nobody in his or her right mind ever does those things anymore. I mean, you've heard that before. You've heard those lines. I mean, deep down inside, sometimes we imagine ourselves to be some mixture of a Western movie hero like John Wayne and rolled up with a heroine like the French martyr Joan of Arc. But the truth of the matter is, most of us, I'm just saying most of us, would do anything to keep from standing alone when we're outnumbered. I mean, we would much rather sink with the status quo. Why rock the boat? Let's just remain nominal. Let's just remain anonymous. One of the greatest fears is being singled out and rejected by the group. Ridicule, as you know, is a pain that is too great to bear. And so we're paralyzed with such fears, whether it's real or stuff that we imagine. And the end result is both predictable and tragic. And that is a loss of courage. There was an apostle, his name was Paul, and he wrote in a book called Romans, he said, I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. And so he goes on to say, right after that, when you present your body and your mind to the right person, he says, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world. Another way of saying that is, do not allow the world to squeeze you in its mold. But he says this, rather than that, be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you can discern what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. In our passage, Paul is just giving us two opposite ways of life. The first is that of a person who is being conformed to the pattern of this world. He's just given up, surrendered to a cookie cutter way of life, and allows other people just to control him or her. And second is that of a person who is being transformed, not by human power, but by the power of God. Renewing our minds is real, it's necessary, it's a must, and I'm certain that, it won't surprise us that bravery and courage just walks out the door when we refuse to renew our minds. There was this one show that was interviewing Dr. Martin Luther King, and he was a black activist, as you know, back in the 60s. And Martin King was asked a very sensitive question by a tactless show host. And this was the question. He said, Dr. King, is it true that black people are lazy, oversexed, and have rhythm? And this is what King answered. Immediately he replied, yes, it is often true. What do you expect? For 200 years, white men have been mocking black people as lazy, oversexed, and rhythmic. After living an environment of repeated mockery, people begin to live out the expectations imposed on them. End of quote. Sadly, people end up becoming what other people expect them to be, what other people would expect you to be. The Bible puts it in this way. In Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7, it says, "For as he thinks with himself, so he is." Let me repeat that for you. For as she thinks within herself, so she is. You know, at the deepest level, even though the majority of people may not want to admit it, most people are conformists. You know, we naturally rebel against change. Change is painful. Change is something to be avoided for most. And that is why we need to change from the inside out. And that requires a radical decision. It requires bravery. It requires courage. But you see, conformity will always keep inviting us, will always keep dragging us, appealing to our insecurities, and painting a comfortable, rosy picture that is telling us or trying to convince us, come on and join us. Why be so different? Don't you know that there's safety in numbers? Now let me tell you a story before I close. There was once this spider who built a beautiful web in an old house. And he kept it shiny and clean so that flies who would pass by would get attracted by it. And the minute he got a customer, he would clean up on him so the flies would not get suspicious. You know, one day there was this fairly intelligent fly who came buzzing by the clean spider web. Now the spider called out to him, "Come in and sit." But the fairly intelligent fly said, "No, sir, I don't see other flies in your house, and I'm not going in alone." But presently, the fly saw on the floor a large crowd of flies dancing around on a piece of brown paper. And he was so excited. He was not afraid. If lots of flies were doing it, why be afraid? So he came in for a landing, and just before he landed, a bumblebee zoomed by and cried out to him, "Don't land there, stupid. That's fly paper." But the fairly intelligent fly shouted back, "Don't be silly. Those flies down there, they're dancing. There's a big crowd there. Everybody's doing it. That many flies can't be wrong." Well, you know the ending. The fly died on the spot. Folks, you know, it takes courage to think alone, to resist alone, to stand alone, especially when the crowd seems so safe, so right. Let's read Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2 once again in the Message translation. And so here's what Paul wrote. He said, "So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. So don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, the culture that surrounds you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God, on the other hand, brings the best out of you and develops well-formed maturity in you. And that, my friends, is our purpose. To know God, to know what He wants, and to do and obey Him in ways that will help us grow and mature and be brave and do the kind of things that the culture would be terrified to do. And I'm saying that will help you stand alone even when you are outnumbered.